Hi everyone, and welcome to the Admissibility of Forensic Evidence lecture. Let's get started. Now, I want to start this video with the definition of evidence. The court-approved part of this definition is key. Evidence is only evidence if it can be admitted into a court of law. What we'll focus on today is how the evidence admissions process works. It's important to remember that courts are ruled by a judge and overseen by appellate judges, so there's a lot of individual feelings about what court-approved actually is. The process of approving evidence into trial is determined by the court's rules of evidence. Rules of evidence are legislatively developed and approved, but can be further interpreted by the court system. These interpretations result in precedent, meaning that other courts have deemed it true, and so the interpretations are assumed valid unless they are specifically either redeveloped or reinterpreted. This emphasis on precedent is one of the struggles that forensic science faces in the criminal justice system because it doesn't adapt to change and modernization as quickly as we would prefer. Now, the rules of evidence are considered exclusionary in nature. This means that the court assumes that the evidence is not admissible until you can show the court that you have met certain standards. The intention of this is to make sure that junk science, or things that are not provable, stay out of the court. For example, astronomy versus astrology. One can be tested and verified by other scientists, whereas the other is a matter of opinion with no way to test and to falsify. The goal of a court approval process is to determine which is which and only allow in the valid evidence. But that's a lot harder task than it sounds. Now, there are 5 major cases that affect evidence admissibility, listed here on the slide. We're going to go over the first 2 in depth during this video, and then the following video goes over more depth about the Daubert trilogy. The first case is called CRIJ versus United States. This decision was entered in 1923, and it's a really important case for forensic science evidence. The case itself involves the use of a polygraph machine. Mr. Fry was charged with murder, and at his trial, Fry attempted to call an expert witness to testify in court about a systolic blood pressure deception test. And this is an early form of the lie detector test that the individual had administered to Fry. The expert would have testified that Fry's test did not show the spike in systolic blood pressure that indicated the subject was under duress and therefore considered to be lying. Now, the government objected to the witness's testimony, and the judge excluded the evidence from trial. Fry was then convicted of second-degree murder. Fry decided to appeal the decision to the Federal Court of Appeals, asking them to reconsider the exclusion of the expert testimony. The appellate court's decision impacted forensic science in 2 ways. First, it affirmed that expert witnesses could testify when the evidence is, quote, is such that inexperienced persons are unlikely to prove capable of forming a correct judgment upon it, for the reason that the subject matter so far partakes of a science, art, or trade as to require a previous habit or experience or study in it in order to acquire a knowledge of it. When the question involved does not lie within the range of common experience or common knowledge, but requires special experience or special knowledge, then the opinions of witnesses skilled in that particular science, art, or trade to which the question relates are admissible in evidence, end quote. Now, note the use of the word opinion here, and that's key. Most witnesses are considered lay witnesses, and they're only allowed to testify about their own perceptions and experiences. Things like I say, I saw, I heard, I participated, etc. An opinion means that the person can offer testimony like, based on this, I would come to this conclusion, and that goes way beyond what a lay witness can provide. But the Fry standard allowed for this opinion evidence so long as the opinion they were giving related to something that would be outside the normal expertise of the average person. By affirming this in their judgment, the appellate courts confirmed that when scientific evidence was presented that could not be easily understood by the average person, then the courts could allow for an expert witness to get on the stand and provide their opinion regarding the testimony. However, the Fry opinion also put an important limitation on expert witness testimony. The courts ended up affirming or upholding the lower court's decision to exclude the polygraph evidence, meaning that they sided with the government and they upheld the original verdict. In their opinion, they wrote that, quote, we think the systolic blood pressure deception test has not gained such standing and scientific recognition among physiological and psychological authorities as would justify the courts in admitting expert testimony deduced from the discovery, development, and experiments thus far made, end quote. What this means is that they agreed expert testimony was useful and important, but they argued that the evidence had not gained what they termed general acceptance in the particular field in which it belongs. And this became known as the CRIJ standard. Expert testimony can be offered about scientific techniques, but the technique itself must be proven to be generally accepted in the relevant field of study before it can be admitted into evidence. Now, the major problem with the CRIJ standard is that in order to achieve general acceptance, you have to be using established methods. And that means new types of methods and new scientific discoveries would automatically be ineligible for admission to the courts, simply because they hadn't been around long enough to gain general acceptance necessary to be admitted. However problematic, though, this decision became the evidence admissibility standard for both state and federal courts up until the late 1900s, when things changed. Now, in the 1970s, the United States government recognized that the CRIJ standard wasn't working in terms of keeping out junk science, so they developed a new standard of expert testimony admissibility. Rule 702 of the Federal Rules of Evidence was adopted in 1975, and it's been amended since then. Rule 702 reads, if scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge will assist the trier of fact to understand the evidence or to determine a fact and issue, a witness qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education may testify thereto in the form of an opinion or otherwise, if criteria are met. Now, first, the expert's scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge must help the trier of fact understand the evidence and help them determine a fact in question. Second, the testimony must be based upon sufficient facts or data, so the expert must be able to explain how they came about their opinion using scientific experiments, tests, or other data. Third, the testimony must be the product of reliable principles and methods, which was included to address the concept of junk science. And finally, the expert must have applied the principles and methods reliably to the facts of the case. This has relevance to some of the later cases that we'll talk about, namely the use of experiments that don't simulate the real-life circumstances. So in fact, the question is how far away did the gunshot come from? An expert would not be able to give an opinion based on a test of what type of gunpowder was used, because that's not relevant to the facts of this particular case, and it won't help the trier of fact understand the evidence or answer the question. Now, as the name suggests, the Federal Rules of Evidence are federal in nature, so they did not apply to the state courts. Rule 702 also created a lot of confusion because people felt like the admissibility standards for 702 were more lenient than CRIJ, and the concept of being more reliable was not really explained in detail. Many states continued to use the CRIJ standard of general acceptance even after the federal courts had adopted this different standard of admission. All right, that concludes the admissibility of forensic evidence lecture, and we'll continue with the next lecture to talk about what comes after Rule 702. Thanks for watching.